Jan Leyers en onze centrale gast Louis Theroux.
Good morning, Lou. Good morning, Lou. Good morning. How'd you sleep?
Too well.
Yeah.
I overslept.
At the Begijnhof?
Yes.
Wow. So you didn't have breakfast?
No, but don't feel sorry for me.
When we talked about who's going to be where, you said, let me be in that chair, then my good side will be showing. You have a good side and a bad side?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I didn't say I must sit on this side. You said, do you have a preference? So it wouldn't be, I don't think I was being precious about it, but being offered the opportunity, I decided this side is better, because one of the discoveries I've made since being in TV, and it's a sad tribute to my vanity in a way that I even noticed, but I realised from one side my nose looks slightly smaller because it's bent. So from this side, in fact the audience can judge, from this side I think they'd have to agree that I look slightly more handsome where the nose grows a centimetre.
How long have you been knowing this?
If you'd said that you wanted to sit here, I would have said, of course. Although I wonder why, because you
I
look
have
good
two
for
bad
a
sides, so it doesn't matter. When did you notice?
About 15 years ago, when I got into television.
Mm-hmm.
So in one scene I look handsome, in another one I look ugly. What's this all about?
Well, you live and you learn. Yeah. You were born in Singapore. That sounds very exotic. How long have you lived there?
I lived there only for a year, so I have no memories of Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents were living there, and so I thought it was important to be there while they were.
Comes in handy. So then you moved to Britain?
They moved to Britain when I was a little over 1 year old, and then from then I grew up in London. But my dad was American. My parents met in Africa, and they were both teachers. But my dad is American, my mum's English, and they decided, my dad kind of compromised and said, I'll live in London, and my mum worked for the BBC, the World Service, and so I grew up in London. But my dad never let me forget that I was half American by parentage, and so I have a slightly dual sense of my cultural identity.
In what way didn't he make you forget?
He's got although he's ambivalent, and he's not a typical American, he whatever that may be, but I think by that I mean, well, he's literary, he's cosmopolitan, he's got a highly developed sense of irony, so he's not in that respect. And
that sounds very British.
In a way, I think he is an Anglophile, although he's got so many problems with the British as well, that he wouldn't want to identify too strongly there either, but he definitely has a kind of spirit of can-do. He was an Eagle Scout. He liked the outdoors. He believed in getting out of bed in the morning and making your own destiny. And so every summer we would go to America, and he would try and instill some of those. He basically saying, like, here's the woods, here's a tent, go out and camp and build a fire, and and he used to have firearms around the house. So, I mean, not in a kind of crazy way, but I remember he sort of battled with himself. So he bought us a small pellet gun because he wanted us to be like him and be kind of outdoorsy people. And then he's like, no, this is crazy, you might shoot yourself. So then he hid it, and he wouldn't let us use it. And then he bought us a motorbike when we were a bit older. He said, I want you to have a motorbike. I had a motorbike. And then he thought, this is crazy. So then he hid the motorbike. But he wanted us to be kind of...
But did that succeed? Because I can't imagine you putting up a tent.
Well, it's strange. I can put up a tent. But I understand why you say that. I think I'm a little bit...
I mean, you don't have this outdoors, Marlboro Man vibe. It's more...
I'm trying to figure out if I should be offended by that.
Urban.
We went camping.
You've got a more urban vibe than an outdoors. I spend my night in a tent in the jungle vibe.
But that's it. See, so I think it's been slightly deceptive. I'm not saying that I'm secretly Bear Grylls and I can go and wrestle a bunny rabbit and eat it for my dinner. But I do. I mean, we went camping last year as a family. I mean, I do enjoy the outdoors. I don't know. You know, I sometimes think I don't know who I am half the time. So I think that I am quite rugged, but perhaps that's a ludicrous kind of idea.
What kind of school did you go to?
My brother and I went to the local state school until we were sort of 8 or 9, and then we went to a posh private school where we would learn Latin and Greek. And then that was one of the things that when we went to America, my dad would show off about. So he would play both sides. He wanted me to be a rugged, outdoorsy guy, but then we meet the family and they're saying, "Hi, Louis, how are you doing?" My dad would say, he speaks Latin, you know. Say, like, "Louis, speak some Latin." And I would say, "Well, no one really speaks Latin. It's a dead language, but I can decline a verb for you if you want."
Was there any theatre going on at school?
A little bit, yeah.
Did you have any? Did you volunteer for that?
I did a bit of theatre, but I never really. I used to get very nervous. One of the things I continue to struggle with, you know, working in television, are the responsibilities to appear on television and in front of large audiences. For some reason, I feel quite relaxed today, but it's not always the case. And so, theatre when I was younger, the idea of, I think what it comes down to is if I feel that I can just sort of be myself, I'm okay. But if I have to learn lines, thank you, then I get nervous. I become rigid with panic. Is that?
We can share it.
Could someone get Jan a glass of his water, please?
Do you remember the part you played?
I was in Bugsy Malone. I played Dandy Dan. You know, I thought this was a masterclass and I was going to impart words of wisdom about the nature of my profession, and here I am talking about my childhood reminiscences. Is this really what you came along to do? I played Dandy Dan and and my performance was acclaimed by all. But I didn't really enjoy theatre, and I don't really enjoy anything where I'm required to be natural, on demand, in an artificial setting.
That's your job today.
Well, in a way, but actually I think it's a testament to, and perhaps this is a neat segue into a professional kind of piece of wisdom, which is that, you know, to a large degree, what we've managed to do as a production is create conditions through a lot of work and planning in which spontaneous and natural things can take place, where people feel comfortable, I feel comfortable, that we can be surprised by the unexpected. And, you know, that's through basic things, you know, which things like actually just filming very, very long days, always shooting when we arrive somewhere, saying hello for the first time, on camera, small teams, small crews, small cameras, and thereby creating a natural environment.
How big is the team you travel with and you shoot with?
It varies depending on the situation, but typically it will be the director who also shoots, and the sound recordist, and myself. And then there's an assistant producer, and I have a running battle with the assistant producers where I try not to be a diva in general. You know, I think it's probably a good lesson too. You know, I try and be a good guy. So I don't really like bossing people around, but very occasionally I'm in a scene that feels very intimate, and I'm talking to the contributors about their kid who has autism, or the fact that they have to strip off and do a webcam show because they're in the adult movie business. And then I see the assistant producer hovering over the shoulder of one of the people just standing next to the door, and I think, what's he doing there? And I go off and say, look, I think you can be in the house, but please don't be in the room. You know, listen from the other room, because that extra person. And you know what, assistant producers are actually the hardest working members of the team very often, because they do a lot of the heavy lifting, figuratively speaking, and they're the ones who are the continuity of the production. Our directors come and go, and our series producer very often isn't on set, but the assistant producer's always there.
And they pick up your passport.
They look, pick up I left my passport in my hotel this morning. Another piece of incompetence. But when they're standing on set, they don't look like they're doing anything. They're just sort of standing there gawping at you. So I always say, like, can you just go away?
So how did you wind up in the job that you're doing now? Was it an ambition to make TV documentaries?
My ambition? No, it wasn't. My dad is a writer, and so And he imposed on me an idea that I should work in a creative profession. He liked me to be a writer as well, but I never felt that I was naturally endowed with any great gift as a writer. And I feel very much that my father, he's a born writer. He can just sit down and the words flow out of him.
Just for anybody who wouldn't be aware, but Louis' dad is Paul Theroux, who is a very famous, acclaimed travel and novel writer.
That's right. And so I knew, so TV seemed like an interesting compromise, that I wouldn't be compared to him, I wouldn't come up short, people wouldn't say, oh, he's a pale imitation of his father. And also that it's a medium that people enjoy, that in their millions, that everyone, I know really has a TV and enjoys watching television. And it appealed to me, the idea of working in a medium that really does reach people. People have a sense of obligation about a book. I really should read more. But no one thinks I really should watch more television. And to me, that's a good thing, because it says it's not a medium that people feel any anxiety about consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people probably had that attitude to books in the 19th century. I don't think people in the 19th century thought, oh, I really should read more. They just read almost as a guilty pleasure, Dickens and Balzac and people. And I think we feel that way about TV now. So I thought I would be a TV writer, and I thought I'd write sitcoms, situation comedies, or maybe dramas. And then I got sidetracked by friends who went to work for Michael Moore, the American documentary filmmaker, and he was starting a new show at that time called TV Nation.
Mm-hmm.
And he was looking, because part of his money was coming from Britain, he needed a British correspondent. And though I didn't have any experience on camera, they said, come along and meet Michael, and you might be the guy for him.
How did that meeting go?
Well, it was, I guess, a weird meeting, because although I was a fan of Michael's, from what I'd seen, I hadn't actually seen his main work at that time, which was Roger and Me. And so I'd been told that I would go and see him, that my friend said, we'll give you the call when he's ready to see you. And I thought, well, I'll watch Roger and Me before I go down there. And then, you know how it is, I was busy, and the call came in a little earlier than I expected, and I hadn't seen Roger and Me. And my friends had been very clear that Michael would ask me about Roger and Me in the interview. And in fact, that it was very important that I should say that Roger and Me was my favourite film. And I feel bad even saying this, but when I went along, I sat down. He was tired, he'd been working on one of his new films, and halfway through the interview, it seemed to be going okay, but he said, have you seen Roger and Me? And I was faced with one of those moments where I basically either lied or I told the truth. Is everyone all right?
Was it a lumpy spell?
If you don't like the anecdote, you don't have to shoot. I said, I love Roger and Me, and it's my favourite film. So I took the easy option, and that really seemed to help, and he hired me. And I was 23 years old, I had no experience on TV, and I was given a job as a correspondent on a network TV show in America, purely through Michael Moore's kind of faith in me, which I'm not sure what that was really based on, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. But were you aware of what you were supposed to be doing?
I knew that it was a new TV show, and that it was called a documentary television show with attitude, and that it was a sort of wild and satirical show that would use documentary techniques and would kind of poke fun at American institutions. And I knew that it was likely that my first segment would be about millennial cults that think the end of the world is about to happen. And although I didn't have any great faith in my ability to be an interviewer and to do that job, I did know that I was fascinated by that kind of material. And so I had a lot of anxiety for the weeks leading up to actually going on that first shoot. And I just thought to myself, this is an amazing subject, and it will be a privilege to be able to investigate these people. And I tried to hold on to that to reassure myself.
Let's look at a clip of some material from the very early period.
Tourists from all over the world flock to this city to be filled with the Spirit of God. They come by the busload to breathe the air of Abraham and King David, to see where Jesus was born, where he walked and lived, to go back to the time of the prophets and lose themselves in holy ecstasy until suddenly they feel different.
G'day, mate.
Rob's looking at all kinds of ways to get the clan name out.
This is the store where you get a lot of your merchandising done.
Yeah, well, we get some keychains and ballpoint pens, fly swaps, cups.
So,
like a cheerleader.
megaphones.
Yeah.
Will the skinhead in the crowd please leave immediately? How about a lighter? Could be handy for cross burnings.
No, that's not cool. You can't use a big lighter for a cross.
No?
No, you have to use a torch or something.
I am the second coming of Jesus, the high priest.
Like his forebear, Jensen has 12 apostles. After the apocalypse, these people expect to be governing the world.
If you've got 9 of them, does that constitute a quorum?
This is all of them, they all couldn't make it today.
Being well connected, Jensen can get fairly specific with his predictions.
By the time that this is put on the air or whatever, some of this will have already happened.
What's number 1?
Atomic war,
Atomic war.
in which a third of the people will be dead in 1 hour.
A third dead in 1 hour.
It started in New York City. It's only about 4 or 5 days away. First bombs will come from Saddam Hussein.
You sure?
I just wanted to check in with you. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot going on, so I just wanted to double check.
Yeah?
You know, about the bomb and so forth. I've been looking for the waves of destruction and I can't seem to find any of them.
Yeah, well, I've been waiting 7 years, but I've been in the faith, and you've only been waiting a few days. You can wait a little longer.
There you go. Love the glasses.
It's the whole LME.
Yeah. More farcical or a little more clownesque?
Yeah, I guess it's hard. I feel almost a little bit embarrassed, to be honest with you, watching that. I mean, it seems kind of funny and it seems kind of obvious. I'm wondering if I didn't know that was me, would I think he was funny or would I think he was kind of a tool? And I'm not really sure what I would think. But I guess that felt right at the time.
Did you have any examples? People that you wanted to be like, or that inspired you, or that you considered as some sort of...
People I looked up. I mean, it's in a way, Michael Moore was one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. It's hard. You know, this is how long ago? That's '94. A lot of that.
18 years ago.
18 years ago. I can't. I think it was. I was basically trying to be sort of Michael Moore Jr. in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd done segments where he'd, it was about getting a ludicrous question and slipping it past the interviewee, so that you got into this ludicrous conversation with them, and very often they would. I mean, they were coming from very oddball. You know, one of them would say he's Jesus, and so the conversation takes place, and you're already in an odd place, and that seems kind of funny. And but I guess I can't think who else there was doing that kind of. I mean, I suppose pranksters as well. People who I used to love prank shows and shows where the people didn't know that they were being set up a little bit. I feel
camera
like in a way
shows?
like for the last 15 or years I've been attempting to lay to rest the idea that I'm in any way affiliated with Ali G and that prank type of TV making. So I feel a kind of a strange ambivalence or a reluctance to go back into that headspace and think about what I was doing at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I accept the evidence is right there. I can't run away from it.
This got you a contract with the BBC to make a series. How nervous were you about that?
Well, I was very nervous, and I was. But what was good was that because that was for a series of hour-long shows or 50-minute shows, I knew it forced me to work in a different way, because you can't be tongue-in-cheek for 50 minutes, to my mind, or at least it's very difficult to make a show. It would get very one note, and you're forced to. It forced me to think more carefully about, exploring real relationships with people, sincere relationships in which I got to know people, in which they were allowed to express themselves, and in which I was sort of given a hard time as well, that I was put through my paces, and so by dint of working at a longer pace, it was because even I think at this time it was stressful and strange making shows where you thought actually the person isn't going to like the show at the end of this, they're going to know that I was sending them up. I never felt that happy about working in that way. You know, I've always felt actually it would be great if when you finished a show, the person in it would feel good about how they came out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know it's not a sine qua non. You know, it can't always be that way, but my preference is not to hurt people's feelings wherever possible. So anyway, so we came up with a format for Weird Weekends, and it still had a comic tone, and it still had moments where there'd be a person in it who was outlandish or difficult or strange, and we'd have strange conversations. But we made it a point to cast in each show, to cast at least one person, maybe more, with whom you felt a rapport, or with whom the viewer and I felt a deep rapport.
Let's get technical. So, an episode of Weird Weekend, how would it start? With an idea for the theme, an article you read in the newspaper? How can you describe how a show like that came about?
Yes, it was. You know, it was never easy to find ideas. It was, and even to this day, it's kind of to find the right idea is always, in a way, the hardest and the most important thing. I'd read an article. The first one we ever did was about militias and apocalyptic groups in Idaho and Montana who believed that the UN was going to invade and take away their guns. This was in the mid to late 90s. It was the height of Bill Clinton was president. It was post the Oklahoma City bombing, but there was still a rampant underground movement of people collecting guns and imagining that we were about to enter this period of civil war. And many of them lived in these mountains. And I'd read an article. It was well known that this subculture existed, so I'd read about that and found it interesting. And then I read a long-form article in the New York Times magazine by a guy called Philip Weiss that, in essence, set out the template for what our story was, that included most of the main characters. And we found other characters, but that was the jumping off point, that article.
Mm-hmm.
The next one we did was about the porn industry, and there was an article in the New Yorker by Susan Faludi called Waiting for Wood, I think. And it was all about being a guy in the industry and how difficult it is for the men to perform. And I thought, well, this would be a great idea for a documentary as well. So, I mean, I feel a little bit strange confessing my secrets, because, again, in essence, we just sort of adapted the article. You know, different characters, different approach, but the same core idea is there, that a profession you would think was attractive and appealing turns out to be deeply stressful and self-sabotaging. So that was, and then...
then you sit with your team in an office and brainstorm about...
No, I came to the BBC under a development deal. I came up with the idea for Weird Weekends, and I said, and these are the ideas we will do. Militia groups in Idaho, porn performers in the San Fernando Valley, Christian evangelists in Dallas, Texas, and UFO believers in the American West. So at that time, and it's always been the case that the ideas are, they're not always mine, but usually they are mine.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I think, because I have to sort of have an inbuilt sense of, there has to be a kind of personal connection to the story. And so usually it's, people bring me lots of ideas, and usually it has to be, not always, but it usually has to be my idea.
And what's the next step? You have to find a setting, you have to find contributors, characters.
Yes.
Is that also your...
No, that's
doing your work?
That's where the series producer, the exec, and the director and the AP all step in. So basically, what happens next is the director and the assistant producer fly out to the location.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there'll have been a few weeks of research. We'll identify an area. It's very important. One of the first discoveries was, you know, there's militia guys all over America, but We can't be flying from Idaho down to Texas, down over to California. It gets too diffuse. And we wanted the shows to feel organic. And we wanted there to be revisits within the show where I would meet someone, go off, and then come back and meet the person again, to give it almost a novelistic quality of getting to know someone and deepening the relationship and being more informed about the story, and then coming back with second thoughts and talking to a guy again. And to make that work, it was important that there was a location, a geographical focus. So the important thing in a way was to find that, and in the militia one it was Idaho and Montana, and we sent the director and the AP out for about 2 weeks, and they just meet all the key players in the area and film with them, and then come back, and then in the office we'd look at the tape and decide, these ones look like they could work, these ones aren't so interesting, and then based on who we selected, we'd kind of we'd map out a little journey for me. We'd sort of say, I'm going to start here, and this will be my orientation in this survivalist store run by Steve Quayle. Then I'll hear about Bo Grites, the leader of the Patriot movement, and I'll go up to his mountaintop house. Then he'll tell me a bit more, and we'll put maps out and plan where we'll be when the end of the world happens. And then I'll meet some of his followers, and then I'll go off and I'll hear about the Aryan nations and the fact that there's neo-Nazis, and then I'll meet Mike Ayler, this guy living in an underground home, and then I'll go back to Bo Grites and have second thoughts with him, and basically it would all be planned out, and then based on that we'd go and film, more or less to a formula. Now we don't plan in that degree of detail now. We're more open to the unexpected for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But for those shows, we had less time, and my participation was a little bit more planned. So there's always a place in the film where I would get involved. In the porn one, what film will I appear in? I'll go to the agent and I'll take my clothes off. In the militia one, it was, well, I'm going to build a house out of straw bales at some point. And so we had to sort of plot a little role for me through the course of the show to do with how much I get involved at each stage.
So the moment you step in and say, hi, I'm Louis, that's the first time you see the person involved?
Yes. If everything works according to plan, yes.
How long does it take you to know this is going to work with him or her, or this is...
I've made shows where after 2 days I said, this is not happening, and we've gone home and we've looked at the rushes, and to my surprise, it's been very explosive material. I made a show a few years ago about neo-Nazis, and it just seemed like there was no rapport building going on, that it was just constantly combative, and then it turned out, of course, that clash was really helpful, and then there's been other times where I felt that it worked quite well, and then we got back in the office and it just didn't. It felt too cozy. So usually I have a sense of what's working, but not always. And in a way, the other thing is making 2 trips. I mean, usually it's more than 2, but making 2 trips is very important, because we go out, even in the Weird Weekends days, we'd almost always go out for 2 trips. We'd go out for a week or so, and then come back in the office and regroup and say, this guy's not working, and this guy's not working, and we need to find another guy who can do this for us, and strategize, and then go back out to get everything on the second trip.
That would take as long as the first one?
The second trip usually would be a week or so. I mean, it's not an exact science. We have 2 weeks to 10 days total usually on those shows. Now it can be a bit longer. In the more recent shows we shoot for longer.
Did you ever feel desperate during your shoot, like it's
Yeah.
not gonna happen?
Yeah. I remember on the first shoot I ever did on Weird Weekends, we went out a bit early because one of the main characters was supposed to be this guy Bo Grites, and he would be flying off somewhere, and we knew we have to film with him now, otherwise he's not available. So we went out and filmed him, and we tacked on another shoot in California with another guy who was involved in the militia movement called Aaron Russo. He was a Hollywood producer. He'd been Bette Midler's manager, and he'd been a producer on, I think, Trading Places, but I may have that wrong. Anyway, I liked him as a character because he seemed very atypical kind of militia guy. You know, the Hollywood producer, he was Jewish, and yet he was involved in these anti-government patriot type activities. And so we went out and filmed with Bo Greitz. And so with Bo Greitz, the big thing was he wouldn't shut up. Like, he just talked and talked and talked. And I hadn't realised that the flaw in my technique, such as it was at the time, was that I could be funny and have great questions and react in the moment, but if someone just talked and talked and talked and talked, I had nothing to do. And I would just stand there and I would wait for him to finish talking. And I didn't want to interrupt because I sort of felt, well, it's important that he should, you know, at some point he's going to, he'll wear out, and I'll kick into action, you know, when he's kind of exhausted himself. But he never stopped. And so at the end of the first day, you know, I remember saying, this is strange, but he really doesn't seem to ever stop talking. And then at the second day, we got a little moment where he was more talking, but then we got a little moment where, with a map, we laid out a map and he had to scribble out the bits of the countries, of America in fact, that were in danger of being attacked, or cyclones, tornadoes, all different kinds of natural calamities. So there was a little scene where, okay, we're colouring these bits, and that seemed to go, that was kind of interesting, and for a moment he was involved in an activity, so it seemed more...
He shut up for a while.
A little bit. You know, we were having a conversation about cyclones over here, so this is all. You can't live here, and then down here this is a flood belt, and we can't be down here, and over here there's earthquakes, so we can't be down here. And then the gist of it was that he crossed out the whole of America except one little patch in Idaho where he was living. So this is the safest place in all America. And so it was, you know, he was explaining why he lived where he lived. So we had that, and then we filmed with Aaron Russo, and again he was just very verbose. And then we went back to the office, and I know we looked at the rushes, and there was a third thing, which was that I had quite bad stubble, and my hair was really long. I mean, it's in this show, so it's not glaringly bad, but I think I was having to get up at 4 in the morning to film with Bo Greitz very early, and I thought, well, I'll just shave before I go to bed, and then I'll have another hour in bed, you know. So I shaved before I went to bed, and I didn't really think that my stubble would grow in the night. And then when I looked at the rushes, I was like, why am I going around with this kind of blue chin? I really don't look very presentable. And so we looked at the rushes, and I remember my series producer was usually pretty good at protecting my feelings and keeping my confidence up and my morale. But when we looked at the rushes, it was a gloomy day. It was a gloomy day, and it sort of felt like, actually, maybe this is not going to work. And I felt that they were all thinking, you know, maybe we're back to loser. You know, this guy Louis Theroux, who we thought was going to be a great presenter, and he's pretty hopeless. Like, he just stands there listening to people talking for hours. He doesn't say anything. He just stands there looking stubbly with long hair,
With a bad side.
with a bad side. And that was also when we said, and we can't be jetting off to California and talking to some guy called Aaron Russo. So it was like, keep it in one location. And there wasn't a great deal we could do with Bo Greitz in the end, because he is very talkative. We scaled, he just became a smaller part of the show, and we used the scene with the map and a couple of other small bits, which all worked. And then regrouped and filmed, and then got everything on the next trip.
Mm-hmm. How do you spend an evening the night before you have to leave for 2 weeks?
Well, you know, it changes, but at the moment I spend it kind of trying to, you know, unloading the dishwasher, cooking meals for the kids. You know, basically, I have to balance my work with my home life, and you know, it's a negotiation with my girlfriend. You know, she in some ways, you know, she's tremendously supportive, but in other ways, you know, it's difficult with 2 small kids for her at home, and so I always feel that before I go away, I need to kind of leave her feeling good about me having been a contributor on the domestic front, if that doesn't sound strange. And I know that on the plane, I'm going to have a chance to digest my notes, and in a way, it's not critical that I know this is going to sound heretical, okay, so I'm going to, maybe I should think carefully before saying this. Okay, I'll say it. I don't think it's vital that I'm hugely, like massively well informed on the subject that I'm about to embark on. In other words, like you can just blanket the whole topic and absorb the academic articles, the books, and in some ways that can, that's not a handicap and it is helpful, but there's actually a limit to how much you really need to know, because the more important thing is that you react in a contingent and a surprising way to the material as it's given to you in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can do that and be uninformed, and you can do that and be informed, and it's important that, in a way, to know the boundaries of your ignorance too, so that you know to push the conversation in a certain way. But I'm usually fairly confident that through the weeks leading up to filming, and then on the plane on the way over, I can absorb enough, and in the course of making the programme, while I'm on location, I will have time to sort of get up to speed on what I'm covering. Am I making in any plausible way a justification for why I'm being so lazy?
No, you unload the dishwasher. Are you happy to leave or reluctant to leave?
It's a bit of both. I'm excited to embark on a new topic. I'm feeling a degree of trepidation about whether it will work or not. Whether this will be the show. I've been lucky enough that I'm not really, in the last 10 years, let's say, there isn't a single show that I don't think stands up, that I don't think is a strong show. Then sometimes I think, well, maybe this will be the one that doesn't quite work out. But then I also feel a degree of relief to be out doing my job, sort of in my professional mode. It's a bit like a soldier going off to a campaign. This is what we trained for, is the cliche of the soldier on the front line.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of feel like this is what we trained for. This is why, you have nerves, but this is why we do what we do, and let's get out there and do it. And then I feel that, a degree, some sadness too, to be saying goodbye to my kids and my partner, and knowing that I won't see them for a week or 10 days.
Is it a cause for friction, trouble, you being away?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. I don't know, to my mind, that makes me it's fairly typical in 21st century Europe, or in the West, that those gender roles are a source of constant negotiation. And so I think to some extent, my girlfriend thinks, well, why isn't it me, meaning her, that's going off for 2 weeks to film in Lagos, and why aren't you, meaning me, staying at home, picking up the kids, making them meals and doing all those things around the house?
What's your answer?
My answer, and I don't know if it's a very good one, is that I wouldn't be a happy person if I wasn't doing this, and a happy person is not going to be a happy relationship.
Maybe she thinks the same.
Well, and then maybe that's
Somebody has to be the unhappy one.
Well, but I also feel that I would support her if she wanted to go away. If she was given a job or decided to work in a field that required her to be away, I think we could work around that.
Let's get back to this information. Does that imply that you have to think on the set constantly like, I know this, but I have to pretend I don't know it? Or can you be natural in your reactions?
I usually, let me think. It's a hard question to answer in sort of in black and white. I'm capable of pretending not to know, in a jail in Miami, for example, people would say, well, if someone snitches in the cell, then we'll beat him up, and I would say I probably would know that, but in the scene I'll say, well, that seems brutal. I don't know, am I pretending, am I not pretending? In a way I'm just reacting as a journalist does.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally it happens someone says something you're by, and then you don't act, but it isn't really acting anyway. So I feel that my position in the film is that it's not that I'm arriving completely fresh. I feel people know that I'm a journalist, and so that I may have been. I think they'd assume that I'm informed on the subject. So I don't feel that I have to impersonate a position of ignorance.
It's hard. Is it hard for you to be shocked, or are you capable of hiding the fact that you're shocked? I remember the scene where you are in Johannesburg with those two thugs, and the one says, you know, I want the money, and I tiger jack people, and if they don't give me the money, I put the kid in the microwave, and then they'll give me the money. And I thought, like, this is the most terrible thing, and still you manage to keep sort of a phlegmatic air there. Is that just the way you react, or do you know?
I mean, is it?
There's more coming out of him if I stay this way.
I seem to remember that I was shocked, and that when I see myself, I can see myself. What I see myself is shocked, but also incredulity, that I don't know whether to believe what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking he seems either drunk or mentally unbalanced. Now, he's saying that he puts kids in the microwave and then he ties people up, and if you don't give him the money, that he'll cook the baby. And my first thought is, well, it's easy to say that, but do you really, really do that, or are you just impersonating a hoodlum for television? And so I said to the guy I was with, who in fact he was our fixer, who arranged the rendezvous with this criminal. Leuven was the criminal's name, and Sydney was the fixer. And I said to Sydney, I said, these things are unbelievable. I really don't know whether to believe what he's saying. And Sydney says, you know, he does. And Sydney sort of backed him up. But I didn't feel that I was having to hide the sense of strangeness and, I guess, revulsion. You know, I get asked a lot, you know, do you attempt to be less emotional than you really feel? And I don't really. I don't tend to feel emotionally that shocked or outraged or surprised. I don't feel an impulse to argue or to
change people's minds.
Reprimand, to change people's mind especially. I feel a journalistic responsibility to, you know, elucidate what they are saying to me and to present a kind of countervailing case of what I feel is correct. And it sounds a little bit dry, but I guess that's sort of how I approach the subject. But there is a little bit of a sense of emotional uninvolvement. You know, with exceptions. You know, I do like the people very often, but I don't feel an instinct to save.
Mm-hmm. Is it always fly on the wall, or do you ever stage things, or ask people to do certain things, go certain places, so that something more is happening?
Well, there's a production aspect to it. So, you know, the director will have been in touch with the contributors beforehand. So there's always a degree of an arrangement. So we've arranged that you'll be at home on this time, on this date, when we arrive and knock on the door. Sometimes we'll say it might make more sense, we'll meet you somewhere else, you know, or we'll arrange to meet you at your workplace. And occasionally, in terms of staging, it could happen that, you know, we're not too precious about... I'll try and think of a real example. When we made this show about neo-Nazis, we needed a kind of a climax to the show, and we knew that in the third act I would need to get more passionate and more involved and sort of come on stronger with the contributors. And there was one of the main contributors was this guy Tom Metzger, who'd been a Ku Klux Klansman, and we went up with him he was a TV repairman in his day job, and he took us to mend a TV and to see him doing it, and he picked up a TV from a client, and the client was, I think, a Peruvian guy who looked like he had some kind of Aztec ancestry, the shape of his face and the way he looked. And then here was this guy, I don't remember his name, and he was saying, oh, Tommy and I are old friends, and Tommy says, oh yes, we go back further than me and my wife, you know, we're old friends. And I'd say, would you call Tom a friend? And he said, absolutely, absolutely, no hesitation. He's absolutely a friend. And then I said, what about you, Tom? He says, oh yeah, I guess we're friends. Now, Tom had been very clear that he was a white racist who didn't believe in friendship between different races. And yet here he was, presented with the actual evidence of his hypocrisy. You know, he's going around saying, you know, there's many white liberals who, despite their avowed intentions, don't actually have any friends who aren't white by dint of whatever reason. He was a Ku Klux Klansman, a neo-Nazi who did cross burnings and went to skinhead rallies, who was with a guy who was clearly not white, saying like, we're old friends and we really get on and he's an older friend than my wife. So in the car on the way back I said, what the hell's going on here, Tom? You're supposed to be a neo-Nazi and a racist. And
Be a man.
In fact, be true to what you believe. You're a total hypocrite. You say, he's going, oh, we're old friends, me and Tommy go way back. You're a hypocrite. And it became this quite inflamed but powerful encounter. So we got out at the end, we went back to the hotel, and then I got a knock on my hotel door, and there I am thinking in my hotel room, well, that's that story wrapped up with a bow on it, and we can move on. And it's a nice feeling, thinking we finally got that scene that we needed. And the knock comes, and the director says, James, the sound man, I've had a word with him, and none of that is usable. The cable wasn't connected. And I don't think it was James's fault especially, I think it was like there was a rush, whatever reason. And I remember looking at the director and Stuart, and I said, we just got to do it again. Now we had the scene with the guy in the TV. We just didn't have the car. When we got back into the car, the cable hadn't been connected. I said, call up Tom and say we've got to get back in the car, and we didn't get it. So it was this rather strange thing where we got back in the car. We went to see Tom. He got in the car. He sat behind the wheel, and I said, well. We were talking about the fact that your TV was being repaired and by a guy, and the TV was being repaired, and how do you justify? And I just sort of started giving him the nth degree again, saying, you're a hypocrite, and how could you justify it? It was a little bit weird, but in essence, we had the same argument, and I think the argument was slightly better the second time.
Do you have the impression that people are aware of what they're embarking onto when you hit the place and start spending 2 weeks with them? Have people approached you and said after a week, like I really don't feel comfortable with this, and
it does happen. It was more of an issue when I used to do stories about a single subject. So when I say subject, I mean a single person. There was a period when I did profiles of celebrities or intriguing public figures, and in those cases, it started with a guy called Jimmy Savile, who was a British charity fundraiser and DJ. He had a kind of a macabre mystique about him that people thought that behind the scenes he might be a slightly different person than he was in public. And
that's a Jim will fix it.
We did a show called Jim will fix it, and we filmed with him for probably 10 days or 2 weeks off and on. Now, Jimmy was unusual because he was a single man. He had no immediate family. He had brothers and sisters, and he was sort of dedicated in an almost priest-like way to the idea of his celebrity. So he would round the clock. You'd wake up, film him. He'd come out in his underpants or whatever and say, "Now then, here we go again, another day." And he'd just turn it on, and then we'd film all day, and then the next day he'd do it again. And he had a seeming infinite tolerance for the camera and for our. I mean, he would kind of have his moods, but and so we made a show that I'm very proud of called When Louis Met Jimmy. And he gave a slightly different idea of what people would be willing to put up with, because then when we tried that with other people, actually they had much less patience for it. So on those kinds of shows, it was careful. We had to be careful, and I was aware that halfway through the filming process, very typically, the people would start flagging. Their tolerance would start to go down, and they'd start to say, actually, they wouldn't turn up for stuff sometimes, or there was a sense of it being a little bit more of a struggle. On the stories that we do now, and it's one of the reasons we do them, is that you've got a subject where, you can spread the story between different people. There's different people who represent different parts of the story that we're doing. And so we never really, we tend not to exhaust. Although the institutions that we get access to, they do, again, on day 8 at San Quentin, even with the best will in the world, the same PR guy or the same communications director has been assigned to chaperone you around, and they're starting to think, oh, how long are these guys going to be here? But and then you talk about that and you work through it, and usually we've been clear in the preliminary stages that the directors had a conversation, and a contract's been drawn up very often that sort of dictates how long we'll be there. So it's been made clear how long the process will be, but the sense of goodwill can sometimes get a little bit frayed.
What part of your life would you rather not have filmed?
Well, that virtually any part. I mean, for me, it's a big part. The big pleasure of making the films is that I sort of get away from myself a bit. I wouldn't particularly. I'm aware that being filmed now, I may have said something that will come back to haunt me in some way. I feel as though there's very few people who, under scrutiny, would not come out with something that could be construed to look bad. In the office, that we would talk in an offhand way or an insensitive way about a subject that we're doing that could be mischaracterized, or that at home, my intimate life at home, I suppose, that would be a side of my life I would.
Would you welcome a Louis Theroux following you 2 weeks?
I think you know the answer to that question. No, I wouldn't. It may be that, I cooperate with journalists, and I do, there is a time when I feel that actually, sometimes I feel, it's nice to get a story that comes out and you feel it's truthful and friendly, and maybe there's some things in it that I don't like, but in the mix of the whole story it feels fairly reasonable and fair, and I'm okay with that. But I don't really see how it helps me. Even if I wanted to, I don't know that it would be the right thing for me to do, to sort of present myself as the subject of a documentary. I'd question what I would be trying to achieve with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do see that I've got a profession, and I need to think carefully about how I approach that, and a part of that is that I need to be someone who's a little bit in the shadows. I can't start to treat myself as a celebrity. It's not a good mix for me.
You being a celebrity, is that an impediment?
Yeah,
Becoming an impediment?
It could be. I mean, I don't feel that I am enough of a celebrity for it to be an issue at the moment. I don't make a lot of stories in Britain where it might be a little more of an issue, and I'm not very well known in America, so it doesn't become an issue there. But I could see how, if people were all excited about meeting Louis Theroux and then I arrive, I don't know, maybe that would be a little bit of a problem. Possibly not, but I don't, I feel as though for me to work in an invisible way, in a way that that people don't bring certain preconceptions to, that I'd rather not run the risk of being well known.
Mm-hmm. Do you keep contact?
And I would say that actually, maybe there is a part of me in an ego way that enjoys being recognised, and maybe I have enough vanity that when I'm asked to do a panel show in Britain, as I occasionally am, I think, well, maybe I should appear on Have I Got News for You, or QI, or Who Do You Think You Are, or these are all British formats, and it would be nice to people to tune in, and would they say that I'd done a good job, and would I be reaching a bigger audience? And I sort of, that's a part of my brain, I try and switch it off and think, actually, why do you want to do that? You might be hopeless, people might suddenly realise how editing, you're made to seem much more witty than you really are. You're on a live panel show and I just look like an idiot. And then the second thing is like, why seek out any added notoriety? Why not just be happy with doing the shows that you do anyway?
How involved are you in the editing afterwards?
Oh, I am. Well, the director and the editor are the principal agents in the edit.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually the edit is 7 or 8 weeks. The first 2 or 3 weeks we let the editor view all the material, and the director is in there with the editor, and they crunch the material down. And then maybe in end of week 3 or thereabouts, we'll go in and we'll view a very long, you either call it an assembly or a very long rough cut. And it could be anywhere up to 4 or 5 hours. I'd rather not see something that's 90 minutes, or even 2 hours would be too short. I'd like to see something that's 3-4 hours. And it's arduous, because you're wading through a lot of material, but it gives you a sense of what your options are. And at that stage, you sort of make some choices, and then the next cut should really be 90 minutes, and you're starting to get a sense of who your characters are. And then at that stage, I'm going in for viewings. Maybe the first time is at end of, say, week 3 or beginning of week 3, and then maybe the next one is a week later, and then the next one is 4 or 5 days, and then 2 days, and then every day or every 2 days until the end. So it's sort of, as it gets closer to the final shape, I get more and more involved.
Who's the first fresh viewer? Who do you show it to
Well,
first?
usually there's me and the director and the editor. Well, and I'm brought in, as I say, week 3, and the series producer around the same time, and then the executive producer will come in maybe end of week 5 or week 6, and so that's the first sort of outside of it, and we're still sort of making important shaping decisions. And then after that, it's just finished, and after I don't really know who watches it. I guess they send it to the commissioner at the channel, or we don't really get notes after that.
No feedback.
No. I mean, they might say, oh, it's good, but they don't say, to change it.
Do you ever keep contact with people from the show afterwards?
I do. I used to think it was important to do that. And I felt that because of the intimacy of the transaction, the intimacy of being there, it was I guess I almost felt, I owed it to the contributor to call them every 6 months and say, how are you doing? And, wasn't it great when we filmed? And what are you doing now? Has the UN invaded yet? Or are you still making porn films? and then, as I made more shows, it became harder and harder to keep up with people. And then I wrote a book called The Call of the Weird. When I went back and interviewed 10 of the people that I felt like I'd been most fascinated by. And I realised that actually this sense of obligation I felt was exaggerated. In other words, that the people that I've been interviewing really didn't mind if I kept in touch or not, for the most part. And this sense of I guess a slight sense of guilt I had about whether I should keep in touch was in my head. So I have a more professional, I think, attitude now, where there are a few that I might...
You did meet a girl from the Phelps family.
Well, what happened in that case was...
The homophobic...
I never kept up with the Phelps afterwards. The America's Most Hated Family, so-called. I really enjoyed being there, and I felt a kind of sense of... I know it sounds weird to say that. I enjoyed being in the crazy homophobic cult. They were wonderful people. It's a bit odd, but when you were with them, not on the pickets, they were intelligent, culturally quite aware, sort of reasonably well-rounded. Say reasonably sounds a bit patronising, doesn't it? They were actually nice people when they weren't doing their pickets. On the pickets, it was hideous and awful and hurtful. But when I left, I made a decision, I guess, that there was no great need for me to email or keep in touch. My director did keep in touch and would say, how are you doing? And they would sort of like keep the conversation going. And in a way, she sort of spared me the necessity of doing it, because then when... what happened was about a year later, I got an email from one of the girls I'd spoken to as part of the documentary, and she said, I've now left the cult, I've left the church, and one of the reasons I left was because of our conversations. You opened my mind up to a whole different way of thinking.
Wow.
Thank you for doing that. And I felt strange, I felt pleased on the one hand. I thought, wow, even though I don't, have an instinct to save people, and even though I see myself as detached, I have actually managed to save someone. And maybe I should feel good about that, but I also felt a slightly strange sense of obligation that she'd turned her back on her whole family. From now on she would have no contact with them, and I knew that she was embarking on a life that would be very difficult, and I thought, the fact that I've saved her, does that give me... I mean, I hadn't saved her, but the fact that I've played a role in that, does that give me an obligation to stay involved? It's a bit like invading Iraq. You invade Iraq and you topple Saddam Hussein, but then if it doesn't work out, you have to form the new government and make sure you're a peacekeeper.
Did
So-
that change your attitude from then on?
Not really, no. But I did write back and say, that's great, and if you're ever in England, I'll go out for a meal and treat you to a dinner and we'll have a nice time. And then she came over about a year after that and emailed, and we went out for a meal together. And actually it was nice. You know, I felt good about, she seemed happy and she had a fiance, and then that became the trigger for going back and doing a follow-up story about America's Most Hated Family. And we interviewed her as part of that. And it was thanks to my series producer and my director that she'd kept in touch that I think they led us back for the second show.
Meeting all these people, supposedly bad people, weird people, neo-Nazis, has it made you more optimistic or pessimistic about people in general? I mean, you could be more optimistic in the sense that evil is sometimes really banal, you know, and sometimes really something that is not, like you said, in the end they were nice people. So did that change your...
I think it, excuse me, I think it gives you a more nuanced sense of human psychology, and I think it's made me a little more aware of the unfairness of the world. I recently did a show about kids with autism, and for the first time I was making a show in which people hadn't really chosen their destiny. You know, you could say you choose to join a cult, you choose to be a porn performer, you don't choose to have a child who's diagnosed with autism, and the difficulty of the lives that they were involved in, and the fact that there was really no way out for them. There was no way of opting out of having a kid who was having tantrums every day and maybe attacking you every day. It made me realise how actually we are not the masters of our own destiny. You know, to some extent we just deal with the lives that we've been given, and you know, it's a terrible realisation in a way. So it made me feel, I don't know if you want to call it pessimistic, it gave me an appreciation of how immensely challenging and sometimes difficult life can be. And I was tremendously impressed with, you know, the good grace with which many of the people, the parents, dealt with those challenges. But it was, you know, there was no kind of cozy lesson to be learned from it, except that maybe in learning about the bleakness of life and acknowledging how awful life can be, that you take a kind of comfort in that, and then it's a good starting point for arriving at a more positive place. You know, that you sort of embrace and acknowledge. I think it's really important to be open about, you know, to go to the darkest place imaginable and not be glib, not be not to be too, you know, falsely comforting about what we're faced with. You know, there's a moment in that film where I talk to a father about his son who's having these tantrums and attacking his parents. He's 13, and they know that within a few years there's a chance he'll be attacking them. He'll be so big that they'll no longer be able to cope with him at home. And they don't really know what they're going to do about it. And I say, does it mean that you love your son any less? And it was a very difficult moment because you can see that we're in a sort of taboo area. The idea of a father acknowledging ambivalence about his own child, who runs counter to everything that we're led to expect about life, that we're led to believe that the instinct to protect for a parent is the deepest and strongest connection in humankind. But in fact, like everything in life, there are exceptions and there are moments of ambivalence. And he says, no, I love him just as I would any other boy. But that painful moment, I think, was important for me to acknowledge, and it felt like it was, once it was expressed, it was somehow a relief, and that you didn't feel like you were somehow tiptoeing around it anymore. And the sense of honesty that came across allowed, I think, me as a person, as a presenter, and the viewer as as someone watching it, to feel that something had been exorcised or dissipated, that a kind of tension and honesty had been invited into the exchange, that meant that everything from there on was a sort of had a kind of positive, a kind of reassuring energy about it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good time to turn to the audience and see if there's any questions.
So I was wondering, you said that in your earlier work you worked with more like scenarios before you started filming, and that now you don't anymore. Why did you change it, and how does it work now?
We don't plan the stories in quite the same way now, and the reason we changed it was because I think you can see in those earlier shows, I'm working to a kind of persona that I'm not really being me in the full sense. That there's a tongue-in-cheek quality to how I ask my questions, and actually the participation, sprang from the same thing that I would say, in the voiceover. I really wanted to get involved and be in a porn film myself, or I wanted to meet an alien. Now, I don't really want to meet an alien. I don't really believe, it's possible. Or at least I think it's highly unlikely that in the space of a 2-week documentary schedule that I'm going to meet one. So I was trying to get closer to a more naturalistic way of working, and part of that meant that participation in that slightly faux naif way was no longer part of the agenda, and so we had to make it more about the relationships, and about my participation became more a kind of an emotional participation of getting to know the people and understanding what their lives were like and understanding their psychology, and so it was less. That meant that basically meant kind of not being able to control the stories as much, because it wasn't always clear quite how that would emerge from the filmmaking. So we began filming it for longer periods. Say, instead of just 10 days, it would be 3 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes, and having a rough idea of where the story might go, but not really being able to plan it to the same extent.
Is money ever an issue?
In what way?
Pressure of budget and
we're pretty lucky about being supported. We've got, I think, an example I would use is we did a story about crystal meth in Fresno. It's called The City Addicted to Crystal Meth, and it was the first time I'd ever done a story where actually the people were directly involved in something illegal, which is odd in a way, because you think, wow, you've done all these stories about people involved in sort of shady business or stuff that's in some way questionable, but it turned, actually porn and being an evangelist or being a cult or UFO, those are all legal. But taking crystal meth, you make a film about taking crystal meth, it's very hard to film someone taking crystal meth, because understandably enough they feel, well, I don't want to take crystal meth while you're filming. And so we made 3 filming trips and edited the show and watched it, and it was good, but there was no one taking crystal meth in it. And you thought, it's about the city addicted to crystal meth. We've got people who are high on meth, we've got people who talk about meth, but we don't really see anyone taking it. And they made the budget work. 3 trips is a lot by any standard. Normally we try and do it in 2, but we made a 4th trip and basically put feelers out, did more research, and found a community of people who were basically prepared for us to film them as they did it. And so, to answer the question though, so we've never been in a situation, I think, where we've had to compromise the story because the money had run out.
Wow. I was jealous already. Nog vragen?
I was wondering your approach about altering the information flowing through the screen to the audience. Like I have observed you're also acting in the documentary, like you're part of the documentary, part of the show. So how do you balance about things happen the way you would? Do you allow things happen that you would like them to happen? Like it's more enjoyable, or do you just accompany the characters and the unusual and absurd characters or issues, and let them tell their story, but you're just stepping out and let them happen. How do you balance between those two?
I think it's a balance of knowing that there are times when the story needs me, that I have a role in a scene, and then there are times when I really don't. And usually that, it sounds a little arbitrary, but my participation will in some way deepen as the story progresses. So I arrive as an observer, as someone attempting to understand the rules in a strange world where I've never been before. And then we form relationships and the understanding deepens, and usually sort of 2/3 of the way through, there comes a point where it's important for me, in psychology terms, or in psychiatry they call it transference. It arrives at a point where I'm somehow the object of the dilemma or of the drama that's unfolding on screen, where I experience firsthand what the people who participate in that world go through on a daily basis. So, so in a story like, I'm trying to think of an example, but in the story with the kid about kids with autism, we arrive at a point where I go and meet a woman who's had to put her 18-year-old, 19-year-old boy in a group home because he's attacking her. He's been attacking her on a regular basis, and she can no longer manage him. And then there's a sense of trepidation that I have about. I've been told so much about this kid that he's capable of being violent, and as much as his mother loves him and says he's a great kid, he, because of his condition, can be unpredictable. And then you see me in the back, and there's a little drama that unfolds where I'm going to meet him, and he comes out of the group home, and you can see from my face that I'm nervous. And it's an interesting kind of dynamic where I'm suddenly in the position of a mother in a way, as someone who's caring for the kid. And we go home, and the mother has to go off and get some food, and I'm caring for this kid, Brian, on my own for a little bit. And then I kind of grow to like him, and we seem to start getting on okay, and it's a nice scene, but you can see how I'm an agent in the scene. And then in the same documentary, there's a moment where another kid Googles me and finds me on Wikipedia and begins saying to me, "Hey, you're Louis Theroux, you're a documentary maker, and you make Weird Weekends, and when Louis met," and you can see how uncomfortable I am. And again, it's not an interview anymore. It's actually, in essence, he's kind of interviewing me. And it wouldn't have been appropriate to have that early in the show, but as the show progresses, it's important that it's a really valuable point to get to, where the dynamic has been changed in some way. So, and that I think is where my technique or my documentaries, where it really starts to work, is where the usual flow of information or the usual nature of the relationship is in some way changed or reversed.
I was wondering, right before you go film, do you prepare questions for the people, or do you just sort of go there and see what happens?
I used to prepare questions. It was actually the Bo Greitz interview that made me think how futile it could be. I had a list of page of questions, and I just didn't really get to any of the questions. And later on, I would do I'd scribble a few questions, and then now I'll just write a few topics, literally sort of on the back of an envelope or a piece of paper, of the points that I want to hit, and it might be 5 or 6 or 7, just so I remember them. And because I think you have to, it's more important to be reactive and to know, to have a sense of where the conversation could go, but actually sort of to be organic in the way you approach it. And then sometimes, I don't really like taking out a piece of paper in the middle of an interview either, because I feel like that can seem a bit artificial. So I might have like 5 or 6 topics that I want to talk to this guy in the jail about, and one of them is he's got the death penalty hanging over him, so I'll put death penalty. There's a code of fighting, so I'll put code of fighting. I'll ask him about how he feels about that. I'll ask you about yard time. So I've got yard time. So then I've got death codified in yard time, and then I've got, I heard there was romance in the jail, and how do they, do they romance one another? So I've got death code, death penalty, code, yard time, romance. DCYR. DCYR, DCYR. And then I've got it in my head, then I'll go through the interview, and then I'll think, DCYR. Oh yeah, I did ask all those questions, so we're fine. And so it's literally, I have a little mnemonic to help me make sure that we've covered the main. It's an awful feeling when you get away from an interview and you think, no, that was great, thank you very much, good. And you're like, oh, I didn't ask. It does sometimes happen, but usually not.
Do you ever refilm reactions of yours or questions?
We do at the end. We do editing, shots where it wouldn't be a reaction shots. Like I don't do.
Like we need a smile.
I can't do that. I hate doing that. In fact, if a director asks me, it says like, so I've had directors who say like, and now you were laughing a lot. Now laugh, and I say no, I can't do it. I can't laugh. It feels terrible. And also, I think it sends a really weird message to the contributor as well. Suddenly you're in this mode. I think directors really shouldn't ask for reaction shots from contributors if possible. And I think, sometimes you have to get your editing shots, but I prefer not to do them, but I accept that it's part of, look at him, and look at him, and now look over here. Like that. And always the contributor thinks that this is fucking weird. What is going on? And then sometimes their minds start racing and they think, hey, what is going on here? And it can cause a little bit of discomfort and suspicion. So I don't love doing it, but sometimes you have to do it.
You talk about one director, another director. There's not a fixed team that you always work with?
I would love to work with a fixed team, but people get promoted and move on, and so there's always a flow of people.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways you start again, with a new team every few years, it seems.
Through in recent years, you seem to drift away from the weird documentaries to documentaries who are more socially relevant. My question is, do you want to be socially relevant, and in what way is it a reaction to your critics who maybe say he's not serious enough?
I've never done anything to please critics. I do think that in an organic way, that the production has grown, it's matured, that I've got older and I've become curious about different things, and just more sensitive to maybe as I've had kids, as I've got older, I've become more interested in socially relevant issues, and also that I've felt more confident in our storytelling abilities, that we can make a compelling documentary. And maybe as well, I've been forced, as I've covered a lot of subjects that are, let's say, traditionally weird, and then I always feel it's difficult to go back and, I can't be that excited about seeing a UFO guy again, or that's not a surprise to me anymore. So I need to keep myself interested by doing new topics, and so in a way I've been forced into covering stories that I've always found interesting, but maybe in the past was afraid that I couldn't bring an audience, or that I wouldn't find a way of making, I was worried when we made this show about Alzheimer's and dementia and the autism one that no one would watch. But in essence, I didn't really have any other ideas at the time. And so I said, maybe it's a show that will get low ratings, but what can we do? This is the story that I want to do right now. And to be honest with you, I feel that there is weirdness. Weirdness is a weird word, but dementia is a weird disease. The lives led by someone who's married to someone with serious dementia, and their partner, their loved one, no longer recognizes them, or no longer speaks any language, or perhaps speaks perfectly fine and socially seems very adept, but doesn't remember that they were married and is now having relationships with other people. It's in abstract, it's no different from the swingers. You know, the guys who do wife swapping and stuff. They're faced with the same dilemma of jealousy, although for very different reasons. And the situation is weird.
Nick?
Well, two questions related. First, did you ever experience that some of the, what you called maybe ugly witnesses, wouldn't allow at the end of the shooting to edit this or another sequence, to do some kind of censorship? And the second question, when you're working for 10 days or 2 weeks with the witness, do you pay them?
Okay.
Not you, but your production.
Good questions. We always have, you know, the arrangement we have with the people that we film with is always that, you know, we will make the show that we want to make. And often we'll build in a clause in the contract that's drawn up, say, with the prison or with the mental hospital or wherever it is, saying, you know, we'll show you what we've made. And so if there's inaccuracies or things that you feel are unfair, you know, we'll give you a hearing and attempt to make the show as accurate as possible, but that we have final cut. And as far as payment goes, you know, there can be payment for, let's say, a prison that lets us in and we're eating up kind of their manpower by needing chaperones to take us around the place. So for things like that, what they call it, compensation for loss of earnings or compensation for access to a facility, yes, those kinds of payment can take place.
But not private people?
Not usually. Again, if they're missing earnings because they're taking a lot of time off work to film with us, then it could happen, but typically we don't.
I have a question about your last film, Dementia. Why is it, I have the feeling that the main focus in your films is on America, and Dementia is especially, I ask myself, why can't you do this film in Britain, or which is a sort of English-speaking country, which is, I think, just...
No, and I've been asked that a lot, you know, when the show went out in Britain, and with the autism one also, that there's no, you know, people get dementia everywhere. I would say there's a couple of reasons, but the most honest one I could give is that we're in the habit of making films in America, and that's to do with the size of the place, the wealth of the country, and the fact that there's a sort of distance and a cultural distance as well that means that a certain dynamic takes place when I'm there. Now, there are good journalistic reasons to do it in America, you know, to do with the fact that Phoenix is a sort of epicenter of the elderly and an epicenter of dementia as well, and that they're pioneering many techniques there. But, you know, in addition to that, there's a sense that because of the distance and because of the nature of Britain's relationship with America, some uncomfortable or bleak subjects are given a little bit more, are made a little bit more palatable if you see them through an American prism. And so it was decided that, you know, something about the sun as well, like the heat and the space and the abundance in America means, you know, maybe I don't want to see people with dementia in a rainy English seaside town.
Make it even more terrible.
But maybe if they're in in Arizona, and maybe if it's a sunny day, and maybe there's a sort of sense of the American personality coming through as well, that becomes an easier watch.
I just want to know where did your choice kind of originate from to constantly be present on screen? Is that something you developed with TV Nation and kept developing after that and stuck to it, or is it because you don't see yourself making documentaries behind the camera, not being present?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of both. I mean, I was a correspondent on TV Nation, so, you know, in essence I was an on-air interviewer, and then that just continued, and there's a little part of me that's always felt that if I was a real documentary maker, I would be behind the screen, you know, I'd be behind the camera, and I feel a little bit ambivalent about making these kind of bastardized types of documentaries in which I'm a presenter and I'm going around, but I accept that actually by doing that I have a different, that's my stock in trade, that's what I do, you know. And I said to my exec once, you know, maybe in the next deal with the BBC I could perhaps, you know, direct something where I'm not in it, or be an exec on something where I'm not in it. And he said, he was very honest with me, and he said, you know, I've got 20 guys who can direct. He didn't say this, but basically saying just as well as you can, or better. Better, right? He said, I've got 20 guys who could do that, you know, better than you. Why, you know, why would I need you to do that? You know, what you do is, you know, you make relationships with people on screen, and you're in the program, and that's your role in life. So I accept that that's how it works, and I think it does create a different dynamic. You know, I think it means that I can kind of catalyze incidents, I can dramatize things, I can be a kind of, I can be a performer, if you like, a sort of a stooge to the situation, or I can be someone who's taking part in something, and it just brings a different dimension to the subject. And, you know, and so it means we can make lots of documentaries, and somehow I think it accelerates the production process a little bit too. That because I'm there, things seem to happen a bit more quickly.
We moeten de tijd een beetje in het oog houden, dus ik denk dat we nog tijd hebben voor 1 of 2 vragen. Begin.
We're always told or asked to make shows like you do. Only instead of 4 weeks of shooting, we have 1, and instead of 8 weeks of editing, we have 3 weeks. Can you give us some advice on how to do that?
That is a tricky one. You know, I don't think I wouldn't be able to make programs like me with a production schedule like that. So I don't really know.
Become a British citizen?
Yeah. I don't really, in all honesty, I don't know. But I guess if you are working in Belgium, so maybe the travel times. I can't really help you. I'm sorry.
Nog 1 vraag.
Mr. Theroux, I guess from time to time you have the feeling, I've seen it all. I've done that, I've been there, I have a t-shirt of the Nazis. And I just wonder, how do you refresh yourself? And how long does it take after a long period of shooting?
You know, I feel that the main way I keep myself kind of interested is just by doing a different subject each time. And occasionally it happens, I think, oh, I think I've been here before. And if I have that feeling, it's not good. And you know, and sometimes it's time to, you know, say, actually, I've done this. This isn't interesting, because I can't fake it. You know, we did a story about mixed martial arts, and after 4 days of filming in California, you know, cage fighting, it's also called. I said to the, you know, I had this. In fact, we flew home and we were in the office, and I had this feeling that, you know, I don't feel very interested about what we're doing. And basically we called time on the subject. We abandoned it and said, we'll do something else. And you know, another thing that the luxury of a BBC budget affords is occasionally stories don't work out. In general, I don't find it draining doing a story. A new story where I'm involved and it feels different and fresh is invigorating. And then I go home and I'm back with my family, and I you know, something about the plane journey and being back, and I feel kind of excited and refreshed by the experience of doing the story. It's hardest when, you know, when I went back to do America's Most Hated Family, it was a slightly uncomfortable feeling sometimes of, I've been here, I've done 3 weeks here, and now I'm back asking again, why do you pick it at these soldiers' funerals, and asking the same questions. And there were a few moments then where I thought, why am I here? I mustn't keep going back. Although the program turned out, I thought, very well. But so in general, it's just a case of trying to keep moving forward with stories that I've never done before.
I have one very last small question. Was there anything on the Eurostar on your way here that you thought, oh, in a masterclass I absolutely must convey this?
You know, honestly, I was just enjoying my continental breakfast and watching the scenery rush by. And so I think you've covered it. You've done a lot of questions I haven't been asked before. So, no, I feel very good.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.